Drafting running backs is one of the toughest things to do in best ball formats. So much of our team's success hinges on their on-field success. And as things change throughout the offseason, we really need to be able to scan the market and find guys that are both overvalued and undervalued. Now, our own Alex Caruso just yesterday, I highlighted a couple of guys that might be undervalued, guys that have a chance to outkick their ADP and provide value to their team. Now I'm going to come in right behind him and identify a couple of guys that might be overvalued in a sense. Not complete busts, I'm not calling that at all. But if I can look for other guys either at the position or at other positions in a similar range, I might be more enticed to draft a couple of those guys instead of the guys currently where they're sitting at right now in the top 24. And the first one I want to take a look at is Elijah Mitchell. Now, our own Sigmund Bloom came in on this channel last year talking about the upside of Elijah Mitchell. I mean, his situation in San Francisco with the injury to Raheem Mostert and the path that laid out before him as a possible bell cow back in 2021. And he was right. He became the league winner that we all expected him to be. Now, from an efficiency standpoint, Elijah Mitchell was essentially middle of the road. I mean, his efficiency comps pretty close to a guy like Devin Singletary, where he was 19th in DVOA according to Football Outsiders, and 50% in success rate, which is good, but not elite, not great. And now looking at a guy that just has raw volume, I mean, looking at his touch share throughout the entire season, I mean, at no point throughout the season did he not fall below a 50% running back touch share, which is great from a volumetric standpoint. But if we're now going to be valuing him at the RB20 range, so in the 4th, 5th round, I mean, we also need to have those peripherals as well, because if you want to try and tell yourself a story about how does he outkick that ADP, we also want targets. We want red zone carries. We want to be able to secure that spot to see where he can actually compete with the guys that are being drafted maybe a round or two ahead of him. And for that, we didn't really see that. From a target share perspective, we didn't see a ton from Elijah Mitchell. I mean, guys like Jermichael Hasty, Kyle Juszczyk was still getting involved. I mean, either one of those guys, I mean, those are the guys that Elijah Mitchell was competing for targets with. And that's not even before we even get into the Deebo Samuels, Brandon Ayuks, and George Kittles of the world. But from a running back perspective only, I mean, Elijah Mitchell could hardly beat out his own running back committee mates in order to earn targets within that team. And the same thing for the red zone running. After past week 10, I mean, Deebo Samuel was seeing close to 2 red zone attempts per game once he became a larger part of the running game, became that wide back that everybody started to talk about afterwards. I mean, Trey Lance only started 2 games, saw meaningful snaps in 6, and still had 5 red zone attempts across just the few games that he was a part of. And so now if the expectation is for Trey Lance to become the starter in San Francisco for 2022, where does that work come in for Elijah Mitchell? So it becomes harder and harder to see a path for him to for his peripherals to improve here in the upcoming season. So again, like I mentioned, if he's being drafted at RB20 and there are guys like, say, Leonard Fournette, I'm expecting his ADP to course correct. I mean, he has a path to seeing more work and have a higher upside than Elijah Mitchell, or some of the wide receivers that are being drafted in that range. I'd be more enticed to look in that direction than trying to make a guy like Elijah Mitchell a larger part of my portfolio. A second guy that I'm looking at that might be a little overvalued at this point is one Cam Akers for the Los Angeles Rams. Now, I know coming off the Achilles injury, it was hard to expect a ton of work for him, or a ton of efficiency, or even just that high scoring aspect to his game that we wanted to see from him. And it couldn't have ended up being worse for him. I mean, from an efficiency standpoint, Cam Akers was worse, or at very best, it was a wash between him and the other running backs on an EPA per touch basis throughout the playoffs last season. Now, of course, super small sample size. I mean, we still have these health issues that we're assuming he's going to get over this offseason, but it is somewhat concerning to see him come back and not at least be efficient with some of his carries. Now, on top of that, I mean, in terms of his the red zone rushing rate, like we talked about with Elijah Mitchell, that was a plus. I mean, he was seeing at least the majority of the red zone carries for that team. I mean, ahead of guys like Darrell Henderson, guys like Sony Michel, which is all great from a volumetric standpoint. But now, if you look at how the Rams started to increase their passing rate once they got into the red zone throughout the playoffs, I mean, that just becomes something more of an issue for a guy like Cam Akers. Now, this is, again, looking at just the playoffs. I mean, just a extreme 4-game sample. And so we don't know how things are going to look throughout the regular season as the team tries to get back to the Super Bowl in 2022. But if he's being drafted around guys like Aaron Jones, who again, I can see a larger portion of targets and also red zone carries being put his way. Now he still has to compete with AJ Dillon, but at least the path to those types of touches, those peripherals, is greater. And even the wide receivers currently going around him, Deontay Johnson, Mike Evans, they at least present a higher upside case from a fantasy perspective. So again, I just wanted to outline a couple of guys that might be slightly overvalued here in the best ball lobbies right now. Appreciate all the love that we're getting here over at the Football Guys channel. But for now, I'll catch y'all next week. But until then, I'll see you in the lobbies. Peace.